Hi, everyone, and welcome to Leadership Thinking. This is episode 71. Here we're doing a different kind of podcast. It's more an information to the community, especially for our educational community. I'm here with Professor Sanchez. How are you doing, Professor?
I'm doing excellent. How are you?
I'm doing very good.
Thank you for the invitation.
One of the things we're going to be talking about today, and we're going to be doing a series a weekly series, where we're going to be explaining how we work with our student, with our community in a non-traditional educational system. Sanchez, can you explain us how non-traditional system work?
Absolutely, my pleasure. But before I do, I want to give a short introduction. I think that it's important to understand that when we talk about non-traditional education, we're talking about something very different than traditional education. And there are some elements of traditional education that, unless we have clear, we can't possibly grasp the concept of non-traditional education. Now, one of the elements of traditional education, of traditional education is that it is the foundation of it is what we have to analyze. Because if the foundation is not correct, doesn't matter what you build on top of it, it will also be incorrect.
Right.
There's a famous saying Dave Ramsey likes to say, that when he has his conferences, people come to see his conferences and they believe that North can be this way. But he has to come and prove to them that North is that way because the compass says that North is that way, not because he believes in himself or because he's trying to convince you. Yet we've been conditioned to believe a lot of the main points that we're going to be talking about today, that these are true points. And unless we understand that they're not true, it's very difficult to get into the area of non-traditional education, okay?
When you're referring to those points, what are you referring to specifically?
I'm going to identify them because at least I established them. I've done a lot of research on this and I've investigated a lot on this. And there's some myths that we accept to be true. And I'm going to be delineating them one by one. For example, the fact that, the idea that the content of the course is the most important thing of the course, that is a tremendous fallacy. Because that leads us to believe that the students have to memorize information, and that is the purpose of education. And that's completely incorrect, and we're going to be talking why it's incorrect later on, but that's one of the major fallacies, and it's probably the first fallacy that I covered. The second fallacy, of course, is that the teacher must be the expert in the classroom, okay? In traditional education, that's a fact, because the teacher spends most of the time talking and the students are passive listeners to an active teacher. That has a lot of negative connotations as well, because it puts a tremendous amount of stress on the educator. He can't be wrong. He has to know absolutely everything. And if a student questions him, then that creates more of an adversarial relationship rather than a learning experience.
Right.
Okay? There's a third one that says the textbook is the most important thing, that you have to complete the entire textbook, okay? And a lot of times parents believe this point is true, that when I buy a textbook, then it has to be covered from page 1 all the way to page 850. And I used to be a believer in that. You took classes with me, you know, that we covered the book from page 1 to whatever page it was. I humbly apologize. I should have turned it off.
No worries.
Okay.
That usually happens. We did that in history, where we took the entire book.
That is correct.
Yeah.
And that's very traditional education. So that's not the real case of what education is about. The book becomes a tool to serve whatever the curriculum of the school is. And that's why it doesn't matter what school it is, you have to adjust. The book adjusts to the curriculum, not the curriculum to the book. And many parents are, like I said, many parents believe that the whole entire book must be covered. And if it's not covered, then education is failing. And that's a fallacy. There are a number of studies that are showing that when a student learns deeply, even if he doesn't cover the entire textbook, he learns more than a student who learns superficially and he covers the entire book, okay? And obviously I won't get into all the studies, but there are major studies proving that particular point, okay? There's another one. Student and teacher must be perfect. That the goal of the class is to discover the right answers, okay?
Right.
And if you know the right answers, then you're an intelligent student, okay? Of course, that casts aside all the other elements that comprise students. And in our non-traditional system, the non-traditional educational system, what we're looking is actually for the student to make mistakes, because it is in the process of making mistakes that genuine learning occurs. See, so students can memorize the correct answer. They can memorize how to spell a word, and they may not have any concept of what the word means at all, but they can spell it, you know?
Right.
Same thing in
Right.
history. They can memorize the year the American Civil War began in 1861. They can memorize that, but they can't explain the whole process. And
Right.
there is what one of the major fallacies of education, that the student must be right and the teacher must be right. Okay, and we
Yeah,
have to discard that.
And going to that point, you may know the date, but do you feel the experience that was happening during that time in the Civil War, which is more important than just knowing the date?
Which is one of the elements of true non-traditional education, that holistic education, as opposed to just education of the mind, which is one of the major myths. So we've already covered 4 myths, okay? And it's important to understand that if we're going to really embrace a non-traditional education, wherever that may be, that we have to believe these points are myths. They're not true, okay? So we have another one here where it says, fairness is a one-size-fits-all curriculum, okay?
Right.
Now, you know, because we have to be fair. Everyone has to be given the same information because we have to be fair. I've heard that so many times from teachers, not from facilitators, from teachers. Teachers will tell me, well, I can't do this special thing with this student because that's not fair, okay?
Right.
And yet,
that's not fair for the other student.
That's not fair for the other student. That's right. Because I didn't do it for this person or that person. And what that does is that casts aside that every student is different and learns in a different way. And so you can't have a one-size-fits-all curriculum, but rather you have to adjust the curriculum for that particular student. And it may be that a certain student may need a little bit more time or a different methodology of teaching for that student to learn. But the one-size-fits-all curriculum is a false curriculum that can't exist unless you have every single student identical in demeanor, identical emotionally, identical in intellectual level, and that doesn't happen, okay?
That's why our curriculum is an active curriculum, which is obviously adapting to every type of changes that the education brings. Like any other industry, education is something that's alive and that is constantly changing to its environment.
There we go. And all non-traditional, I've written a book about this, and I understand that the book can't be the Bible, because as we find more and more information, and neuroscience is doing a spectacular job in this, you know, teaching how students can learn, how the learning process actually occurs. And so this is going to be constantly changing. In my opinion, the future will be more into virtual reality, augmented reality, holograms, which is coming. You know, I don't know if I'm going to be around to see that, but the education has to change as it goes along. So there's no one correct way to teach, and even as you do non-traditional, you'll be evolving every time.
Right.
You know? So there's another one. This is, we need a summative assessment in order to evaluate teachers and students. What that means is, you know, everyone's accountable, and so there has to be that number, that final number, and that's false, because the actual learning occurs in the process. So it's a formative assessment rather than a summative assessment. What is the facilitator?
Can you explain to the audience what's a summative assessment and what's a formative assessment?
You got it. A summative assessment is when you evaluate the end result, and the process to get there is not evaluated. You know, it's just, what is the end result? A formative evaluation evaluates the process as the student is going through the process. What changes is the student experiencing? What are they going through? What are they actually learning in the process? Okay, so I can give you an example. If you just do a summative assessment, then everything effort that the student makes isn't evaluated.
Right.
And the actual learning process isn't, the only thing that's evaluated is what is the result? What does he know at the end? Now, we're not saying that that's not important.
Which is usually done in written exams, quizzes.
Which is always done in written exams and quizzes, which is linguistic.
Yeah, by listening.
Linguistic. Okay. So the linguistic student has a tremendous advantage when you do only summatives, because there are different ways to do summative evaluations, but when you do only summative evaluations in a linguistic format, which is what 99.9% of the educators do, okay? When you do it that way, then of course, you can have a student who really has learned a lot, but because he can't express it in a linguistic summative assessment, then you're not really evaluating what he actually knows. You're evaluating what he can express in a linguistic evaluation, which is totally unfair, not fair.
Of course.
So we have to change the mindset that the summative evaluation is the most important thing. The summative evaluation and the positive summative result will come when along the process, the evaluation is done in a formative manner. The end result comes naturally.
That is a formative evaluation. How does
the
that
formative
work?
evaluation is how the student is learning through the process. For example, you may have an activity, kinesthetic activity, where you determine the student's going to be moving in order to learn a certain skill. Okay, and so that becomes an evaluation, and rubrics form a major part of that. Okay, but not the only part of that. We have over 100 different methodologies to assess a student. Which includes journal writing, may include presentations, may include verbalization. There's so many different ways. And relying upon one type of evaluation, I'll give you an example. We had a student here who pulled a 6 out of 10 in a quiz, in a science quiz, okay? The quiz was about cells. And so the student, he pulled a 6 out of 10. Now, that would mean the student actually learned 60% of the material, which would be a D if you put it numerically, which means the student didn't master the material. Now, that same student is put to work to create that cell, and he creates the cell. And in the process, this is actually happened. The facilitator came to me and said, incredibly enough, the student not only created the cell, not only knew the information that was required in the book, but knew the information beyond the book because he researched that information, which was not evaluated in a summative evaluation.
And going further than that, he could be able to explain it to other students how the cell work.
That is correct, because he understood it. But remember that the evaluation only evaluates what the book allows you to evaluate, what you require the student to know.
Right.
Yet the student knew what the book required to know, but not only that, he knew well beyond that point, because the facilitator would ask him, what is this? Which was not included in the learning, which was not included in the book. The student by himself did external research and knew that information. So learning and evaluating only by summative assessments is incorrect. It's unfair to the non-traditional student, and it's also unfair to that student who's not a linguistic learner. Okay,
I think it's not fair to everyone.
It's not fair to everyone. I agree.
Because sometimes you learn things from another way or another perspective, and if you're only evaluated in one area, you're not going to be. It's not going to be a whole evaluation that's
sure.
Had they, equal or.
Yeah, had they said to the student, explain to me everything you know about the cell, the student would have gotten 100, you know, because he would have explained not only the stuff that he was required to learn, but well beyond that. And that's what we're looking for. Yet traditional education limits that. Traditional education says, this is what you've got to learn, because the facilitator, the teacher, because if you're doing it this way, you're a teacher. The teacher doesn't evaluate beyond what the student's required to do. Interesting enough, what the students learn from that is to conform. To do only what is required, because this is the only thing I'm going to be evaluated on. And so they conform their education. And what you do is you kill creativity. Okay. And we're going to talk a little bit about that maybe in the future when we talk about the creative element in non-traditional education.
Of course. Yeah. We're going to be talking about the creative element. We're going to be talking about communication. We're going to be talking about
critical thinking
skills, higher order thinking skills. It's part of the series that we're going to be developing. Right now, this is an introduction about what is non-traditional education
versus traditional
education. One of the things that I explain to new parents when I'm doing the tour with them is basically that the main difference between traditional education and non-traditional education. Traditional is in which we basically got our education with, right? You go where the teacher stops. This is what the teacher had planned. This is where your students will go. With non-traditional education, up to 99% of the time, the students will surpass what the teacher had expected for that particular class.
Sure. Which is one of the major fallacies that people tend to believe, that students won't go beyond, that they're only going to do the limit. And that's a fallacy, a major fallacy, because students want to learn. It's the nature of students to learn. And they will go beyond what you ask of them if you allow them to. And later on, when we'll talk about the role of the facilitator, we'll explain how that works and why the facilitator plays such an important role in permitting the environment for that to actually happen. You know, one of the other fallacies that they have is learning is concentrated on the brain. And so it's all cognitive. And we're just going to, traditional education is how much you can remember, how much you can regurgitate. That determines whether you're intelligent or not, or whether you're a 4-point student or a 3-point student. And that, of course, we know is a fallacy, that there's a lot of learning. There's emotional intelligence, there's cognitive intelligence, behavioral intelligence, and there are many, many different types of learning skills.
There's discipline,
Of
responsibility.
course, all of those are learning skills as well. And non-traditional education doesn't just look at the student as a walking brain,
Right.
okay, but as a whole human being. Okay.
It creates an environment, right, where he feels not only special, but he feels like he can do other things instead of hearing the teacher all the time. The teacher becomes a facilitator in the process.
That's right. And when we get to the part about the role of facilitator, we'll speak about that.
Of course.
Because unfortunately, I think the role of the teacher is pretty much dead, to put it honestly. The teacher as a stand-up and speaking the whole class type of thing doesn't work. Today's student won't respond positively to that. Okay.
Of course.
There's another one that says, students need to spend time consuming content created by other people. Okay. That's a tremendous fallacy, because today's student should be placed in a position to create content and to talk about that kind of content.
And not only create content, when you're creating that content, you're creating new knowledge.
There we go. Yeah, and when you talk about neurosciences, how those connections between the brain, nerves, and how all the system works,
right?
By exposing students to unusual or unknown situations is where they develop new neural pathways of actual learning. Okay, when you don't put them with that, for example, the teacher will give the answer. If you don't know the answer, the teacher will tell you the answer.
Right.
So the discovery element is gone. Because the discovery element is gone, there's no development of new neural pathways.
Correct.
Okay. So in non-traditional education, discovery is primary, and a true facilitator creates that environment for discovery to occur. We're going to talk about that when we talk about facilitators.
That's very, very interesting. It just happened last week, where Ms. Benitez, which is our mathematics coordinator for our Singapore program, she was explaining that one of our facilitators was divided our kids in group. I think it was third grade, and they gave them, I think it was 9 pieces, and they had to do groups, right? And the first time, the kids thought, okay, wait, I can divide this in 2 groups, but then I have one that's missing. What can I do? Can you give me another one, teacher? And the teacher did not give them another one, and she just facilitated the process for their critical thinking skills to hit and say, wait, I can divide this into 3, and then I get 3, 3, 3, which is 9.
That's
and
right.
That would have been, something less powerful if the teacher would have said, no, remember, 3 times 3, how much is that? Oh, it's 9. So that is the process that is not only non-traditional, and that we have other types of educational programs, which is Singapore Math that runs from pre-kinder to 6th grade. But if we only had Singapore Math in our classes, well, in a traditional format, then it wouldn't work.
That's right. And the interesting thing about that is, and the studies demonstrate this, that when students discover something, they remember it. When you tell them something, they'll remember it for an exam, but then forget it quickly thereafter. But when they discover their own knowledge, they retain their own knowledge. The example is the Super Mario games, where they're playing Mario games, and then they don't have any instructions. They're just playing it. And as they're going, they're discovering how to get from one level to another level to another level.
Right.
Now, today's students do that very quickly. Okay, they know how to do that. When at my time, we didn't play Mario games, so we didn't know how to do it.
Give me a second.
Sure.
Let me check this out.
Oh, you added them. Yeah.
Happens when you do things live.
Yeah.
You can keep going.
Okay, you're gonna have to edit, I think. Okay, so and the next one, and brings me to that particular point, that teachers do most of the talking in a classroom. Okay, and what I've learned from reading tons of studies is that the less the teacher talks, the more learning actually occurs. So one of the things that I say very clearly to the facilitators is talk less than 10% of the time. Let the students do the talking. And it's hard. One of the things when we first started implementing it here, and we had our weekly meetings, because we're supposed to have weekly meetings on this. When we had our weekly meetings on this, they would always say, it was so hard for me to keep quiet and not give them the answers, because that's how ingrained traditional education is to us. That instead, and it was tough in the beginning. I think most of them have accepted, oh, let them discover themselves. But when the students discover by themselves, they learn more. And it's hard for a teacher who's been in this. There's really no school, even in the United States, there are no teacher education programs that are teaching this. They're teaching, teachers how to teach in a traditional way. Even the most non-traditional type of teachers program doesn't teach this. And so for teachers, it's very hard, because they may know the answer. They see a student struggling with the answer. The first impulse is, let me give them the answer, because we have to go to the next step, right? No, you must let the student discover it. And the teachers here would tell me all the time, it was so hard for me. This is the hardest part for me. It's not to give them the answer. Okay.
Right.
So,
which is one of the most important areas in non-traditional education is our facilitator constant training. That is the hardest part, because these are not new inventions.
Exactly.
These are not new things.
Exactly.
The difficult part is the application and to apply it to our entire staff,
Sure.
which has been a constant deliberate process, which is not easy.
Yeah, that's why I always say 10%. Establish a number. Now, is 10% the absolute number? No, there's no real absolute number,
Of course.
But if you're thinking 10%, then you're talking in a 1-hour class, the facilitator should only talk 6 minutes. That's it. But if he talks 7 or 8 minutes, or if he talks 10 minutes, is that wrong? No. If he talks 1 minute, is that wrong? No. But once you have a number in your mind, then that means 90% of the talking is done by the students. And now you're beginning to develop a non-traditional class. As long as the teacher is talking more than that, than a substantial amount of time, then it becomes a traditional class. And it's really easy to swing into a traditional class, because, like I said, these are ideas that we believe firmly, we believe strongly in them. And to let them go is very hard. Okay. There's another one, technology as an add-on or an afterthought. Okay. This goes to those teachers who don't believe technology is going to help in the education. So the fact of the matter is that any teacher at this stage of education who believes that technology is just an add-on should not be teaching. Right. Because the reality is technology is already integrated into the part of not only the students' lives, the teachers' lives as well. So now how do we take that tool, which is a fantastic tool, and use it to motivate, inspire, to get our students to create new, different things? That's how facilitators think. Teachers think, let me take away the technology from the students. Right. They can't use computers. They can't use cell phones. This is incorrect. The students need the technology, and you direct them to use it as a learning tool, and it can become a tremendous learning tool. Today's students know that the teachers don't know everything. They know it. Even if a teacher wants to believe they know everything, the students know they don't. And they have all the things on the internet. Now, there was a study by a company, the Pew Institute, PEW Institute, and they made a study, and one of the questions they asked the students were, is everything in the internet true? And more students said that it was not true, that there was most things that are not true on the internet than the actual teachers. The teacher said that there were more things that were true, and the students themselves, who we think believe that everything in the internet is true, the study shows completely the opposite.
Interesting.
And there's tons of studies like that. I think that facilitators and teachers as well need to really do the research and see what the studies are actually saying, because I believe based on studies, we can actually come to true conclusions. I always tell I don't say things that I haven't researched or studied for. Of course. And whether if it's contrary to what I believe, then I have two choices. I can continue to believe what I want to believe, or I can modify my belief system to align to what the study is saying is true. Does that mean that every study is true? No, that's why you look at a lot of studies.
Yeah, that's why you do research. You do triangulation. You check the literature. You look for gaps. The gaps is information that's missing from each other, or one might say something, the other might say the other thing. So you have to keep searching to see which one could be more true than the other, right? And if they are peer reviewed, because if you look at the internet, most of the information is not peer reviewed. It comes from magazines, it comes from newspapers, from websites. And to teach our students, first, of course, we made them look for the internet, Google, and do stuff like that. But then when they get more older, it's okay, where are you looking for that information? Has it been peer reviewed? And what is peer reviewed? It is that other peers from a particular journal look at the article and make sure that it's true. And that could change, but at least at that particular moment in time, that was true. And when you read something that's been peer reviewed by other people, it gives you a higher level of certainty that what you're reading is actually true. And that is something that our students are working on each day, especially from the upbringing, right? Elementary, then middle school, and all the way to high school, and to get them to have that mentality that not everything that they see on our internet is true, and how they can find out that it's not true is very important, not only for the students, but for the teacher as well. Because there's a very interesting thing that I keep hearing people saying that, oh, this and this happened. And I ask them, okay, objectively, where do you find that out? Oh, on Facebook. Okay, Facebook may have a lot of things that are true, but it may have a lot of other things that are not true. So what other sources did you find out about that particular information? Which is something that we all make those mistakes. We all just look at one particular source and, oh, it's true. No, it's not. We have to find out and develop that creative mind is very important for our kids. And that is something that we do here every day. One of the things that we always do in a classroom is creating an environment where the student or the child can develop creativity, critical thinking, communication skills, and it has to be able to collaborate. That's one of the main things that non-traditional has and provides, which is something that is proactive. It's not something that is, we do this, yeah, it comes out as a byproduct. No. It's something that is proactive, that we engage every day with them so they can develop those skills. So when they become adults, they have, other types of tools that they can use, in part with the other part that we also have here in our school, which is the emotional learning, social emotional learning, and character education, which combines into a whole student. Now, Sanchez, before we wrap things up for this first episode, what are the main points that you would like to talk to our audience?
Sure. Well, and as you mentioned, that the questioning, the students questioning. There are two things you have to question: the reliability and the validity of any study. And there are more myths that we have to talk about. I think we just covered 7 or 8 of them, so we'll maybe cover the next 7 or 8
of course.
in the next thing. But it is important, if you're planning on becoming a facilitator, that you disassociate from these false traditional myths or belief systems, and it's hard. It really is hard. And even when we started, it was really hard.
Of course,
but
hard with ourselves as well, with our faculty.
That's right.
It was a struggle. It's not easy. Everyone can learn about this, but the implementation and the execution of it is very hard.
Sure. To a degree that we let go of these myths, to that degree, then we're providing the service that the student requires, that today's students require. And we motivate today's students and we inspire today's students, which is one of the purposes of a facilitator, to motivate and to inspire. And letting go of these traditional ideas will lead to that particular point. That's the death note of traditional education.
Correct.
Traditional education doesn't work because it doesn't provide what the student needs. I'll give you an example of a love relationship. A lot of times when people fall in love and then all of a sudden they fall out of love, they can't question what's going on here. Well, the reality is that when people fall in love, there's specific needs that the partner fulfills. Okay, and the same way the other way. When those needs are no longer fulfilled, or the needs change, and then those needs can't be fulfilled because the needs change, whether it be from one partner or from 2 partners, then that relationship becomes broken. Traditional education is there right now where the needs of the students have changed, but traditional education wants to keep it the same.
Right.
And as parents, they're educated when we think that education should be this way. I say to the parents, no, education does not have to be that way. It has to change because the needs of the students change. Teachers say the same thing. "Oh, this is how I learned. My students were learned the same way." No, they're wrong. The needs of the students have changed. The way the students learn and the way we must teach them, or not, I don't like the word teach, I like the word allow them to learn, has to change. Okay, so this is just the first step. But until we can recognize these fallacies, we cannot build a true educational system.
And as the first step, that's why we're doing this series, where we are going to be not only educating all of our audiences, but you as parents, you have to know, right? How are we working with your students, with your kids, to become better citizens and become successful in life? This is a process that starts from pre-K all the way to high school, which is a 14-year process. And the earlier the students begins here, the most significant amount of education he's going to receive, which is in a holistic approach. We are going to work in a non-traditional way to develop the necessary educational skills, right? And all academic skills, and also the humanistic skills. How to become a better human being and how to work with others. That's why we also have emotional learning, social emotional learning, virtuous project, and we have what we call character education. As a whole, in a whole complex system, which is our school, which is a dynamic educational school that works towards your kids' future. We don't worry about them, what's happening now. What's happening now is building up for what they can do when they're adults. So thank you very much. Thank you, Sanchez.
My pleasure.
Going to be seeing ourselves next week. And what are the pointers that we're going to be talking about next week? So
okay, next week we'll finish with the rest of the myths. I think there are about 6 more myths that we need to cover. Perfect. And then one of the elements, once we understand what the myths are, we go to the next step, which is what are the benefits of non-traditional education? Because if we're going to change, if the idea is to develop the system, then we have to find out, is it truly beneficial for our students? So we're going to be talking about how non-traditional education benefits the student. I think we have about 12, 13, 14 different ways that it does. And I think that the parents are really going to enjoy this.
Yeah, and we're going to also put perspective from teachers and perspective from parents. I'll be, but how does that work? Because I usually want my kid to be more like an individualistic style. He doesn't like to work in groups very much because they don't do the work. And we're going to be talking further about that. So it's going to be very interesting. I hope you guys like it. And if you have any suggestions, you can write in the Facebook page. Any other interest that you guys might like,
or any questions about what's been said,
or any questions about
or doubts.
This episode. Yeah, it'll be very good. So thank you very much, and have a good one, guys.